Yeah.
YouTube. Yay! Okay, so before that, I'm just going to welcome people, debaters who are here. I'm so thrilled to see them. And foremost, Anupam Sahai. And he must have been 18 and he wasn't even 18. He was 16 and I was 15 and I was in this class in DPS and our English teacher, I know, sorry Sahai, you've heard the story so many times, but so there were these two star debaters who arrived and we were really happy because she didn't teach, basically training these two star debaters, and one of the debaters was Anupam Sahai, represent DPS some competition. So Sahai. And Sahai, I can see Sukumar too, your Bitsian, fellow Bitsian. Hi, Sukumar. So
Oh gosh.
Sukumar is a fiction, rooting for fiction. Shubha, are we on YouTube?
I've given you the link on a chat. Now that link may not be the same as before, so you may have to, that's the problem with YouTube.
I know. Okay, so
I am waiting to get information.
You have to close the window. You have to close in the browser the YouTube window if it opens up.
Yeah, it's not opening up, but everybody has to switch their mics off. Wait a second. Okay, so hi, and we've been doing this in small bits and pieces over a long time. Fiction? No, non-fiction. It's been quite a fisticuff, so we are actually getting everybody on, and it's so the best, perhaps one of the best parts of this is that we've got people from all over, which normally doesn't happen if you're in one place. So there are people from Delhi, speakers from Bombay, Delhi, Singapore, London, Manali, Kenya as well. So that's fabulous. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, before I introduce the speakers, I'm going to go through the rules. But before that, I have a confession. A week ago, we drew lots for picking sides for and against, and there was just so much heartburn. And what's worse, there was some horse trading as well. All the fiction lovers were like, oh my God, we can't talk about non-fiction, we can't speak at all. But some people stuck to sides that they wouldn't normally have taken. So very sporting. And let's see how they make the case. Both sides formidable speakers. And I wouldn't go up against any of them. They might look like really charming, but yes, there's so before that, the rules. So each speaker gets 2 minutes to make their case. I'm going to be a little lax with timing. So at 2, Meena will ring the first bell, followed by which at 2 minutes 30 seconds, she will ring the second. And the third, the hard stop, is 3 minutes. So after each speaker makes their case, they will be subject to rebuttals, and that is going to be 2 questions. One question is going to come from another speaker who's on the opposing side. So if you're speaking for, only the against speakers can ask you. And one question will come from the audience. And again, the answers to these rebuttals should be approximately 30 seconds each. So there will be a timer at 30 seconds, but again, you can go on for another 15, 20 seconds. So that is that as far as the speeches are concerned. If you want to ask a question. So if speakers want to ask a question, you have to raise your hand or press the ask a question icon. If audience wants to ask a question, then you can either type in the question on general chat, raise your hand, or press the raise your hand icon, and whichever one I see first, I will call on them. If there's a doubt, I'm going to ask either Meena or Kay for a backup. So that's that's how it goes. But before that, Shubho, do you have the poll? I don't see the poll here. Oh, yes, I do. Okay, before that, I'm going to run a poll. All right. And the poll goes thus, that if you had to read 10 books, how many of these would be fiction? So if you're going to read, and the poll is such that you can't say 0, you have to at least read 1 fiction. So here's the poll. And just click how many out of 10 fiction books would you read? Okay, done? Okay, so I'm ending the poll, and here are the results. So 7 seems to be the magic number. So it's a pretty fiction slanted house, looks like. Okay, so yeah, Ravi, are you saying something? You're muted, I can't hear you. Okay, so here's the order which we drew lots for a few minutes ago. We will start with Ravi speaking for the motion, followed by Likla against, followed by Vivina for, Abhishek against, Priya for, Roland against, Mimi for, Shubho against. Okay, so starting with Ravi. So when Ravi was about 18, he went from his residence in Shivaji Park to Pedder Road. And he walked into the Russian Cultural Center because he loved Dostoevsky so much, he wanted to read Dostoevsky in the original. And that was a start of lots of events, all sorts, literary and otherwise. And if you imagine anything, you're okay. You're not wrong. All right. So there he was in Russia for 10 years, Poland for 5 years, 15, 20. How long was it, Ravi? Russia?
Russia, 15 years.
15 years. And he was working for BAT, but he was also doing all sorts of fascinating things, like being a consultant to none other than Kasparov. And we suspect, though this is not confirmed, maybe Putin. We're not sure about this. He denies it strenuously. But that's it. And so Ravi,
Putin was nothing in those.
Yeltsin. Okay, Yeltsin. And maybe Putin. Okay. So Ravi, over to you. And the motion, sorry, which is, this house believes that leaders benefit more from reading fiction. Ravi, in support of the motion.
Tell me when you start your watch.
Okay.
Start?
Yeah.
Start? Okay.
So since Sonia talked about my reading Dostoevsky at 18, I'll talk about the book which I read at 17 called The Day of the Jackal by Frederick Forsyth, which I suppose most of you have read, certainly the older generation. And in those days, the film took a long time to come. And I think there was a gap of 6 months between my reading the book and the film. And when I went to see the film, I don't know how many of you have seen it, Edward Fox plays the jackal. And the first thing that struck me in the hall was that all these characters are very different than the ones which I had created in my mind. You know, when I read the book, I had created a jackal and I had created this Claude Lebel, the detective, and all the locales. Although I had never been abroad, I had pictured them. And as a 17-year-old Indian boy, I had imagined the sex scenes also. And whatever happened in the movie was very different. And that told me, even at that age, that actually when you read a book in your head, creating a whole movie, you are the producer, you are the casting director, you are the costume designer, you are everything. And that happens with fiction. Whenever you read a book, and each of us reads the same novel in a different way, unless you've seen the film. And I mean, if you take someone like Sonia, Sonia has already produced and directed something like 5,000 films. And that is why she is the type of leader of the book club that she is, not because of IIM Kolkata. So creative thinking is the first point, which is critical for a leader that fiction gives. The second is, of course, people management. I mean, without people management, there is no leadership. And if you look at fiction, fiction tells you how people are like, how human beings, the jealousy, the greed, the injustice, the unfairness in the world, the fiction actually destroys idealism. And that is why you begin to understand through fiction the world as it is. So people management, which is critical. Again, I'll talk about Shubho. Shubho is a Hawkins CEO because he has mastered Mahabharata, not because he has read all these essay type books. So there are lots of other points, the communication, and but if you were to give me half an hour more, I would go through it. Thank you.
Okay, well done. And questions from the speakers? Any speakers who want to ask Ravi a question, raise your hands. You have to, otherwise he'll get points for nothing. Be competitive, guys. Yeah. Sonali, that's the audience question. But before that, one of the speakers, come on, guys, you really need to ask him something. Okay, the for fiction side is all right. Okay, so Sonali, you go. We'll have 2 questions from the audience then.
Where is Sonali?
I'm sorry, I probably clicked on something unintentionally. Pardon me.
Now you get to ask Ravi a question.
I don't have one ready in my head.
You can ask him whether it was, what did he say to Yeltsin?
Go ahead, please answer that one.
Well, these things are confidential, so it's not possible to say it in public, and certainly not on Zoom.
Okay, so
I have a question.
Okay.
Can I ask?
Yes, of
yes, please, yeah.
How much of Russia was fact and how much was fiction?
Well, that's a good question, but I mean, Russia, when you live there, it all looks like, I mean, it was entirely a fairy tale. And I think it is, unless you live there, it is impossible to understand what that fairy tale is about.
Thank you. Okay, I'm done.
Anybody else? Another? Okay, so Ravi, you got the beginner's luck, only one question. So we move on to Likla. And Likla had a really interesting childhood, right? Likla's parents decided one day that they don't want to live in Bombay, and they took Likla and her sister away. And you guys grew up in Ooty, right? I remember it as being this fabulous hill station. And so if she knows everything about birds and the outdoors, that's probably credit to her childhood. She's also the very prize-winning, award-winning writer of a book called Art is a Verb, which is it's a picture book and a lot of kids use it. However, it seems to have made its way into a lot of advertising agencies where it is used for pitches to clients. So Likla is our celebrity author, and here you go, Likla. The screen's all yours. Oh, we can't hear. You need to.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So, as I make my case for a leader, that a leader would better I like to make a borrowing from my worthy opponent and consider an assumed leader a fictional leader. For all intents and purposes, this leader is a human who is in charge of a group of other humans for whatever reason, elected, coerced, circumstantial. Again, well, where we are at the Juhu Book Club, for the sake of this debate, we can all agree that readers ought to read. All leaders ought to read. All leaders ought to be readers. and would certainly benefit from reading. And this benefit is for their role as a leader and not merely for personal gain. So firstly, it's important that the leader knows the world, especially the world that the group belongs to. And so their leader, our leader, reads diversely and voraciously, swallowing and masticating Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, Abhijit Banerjee. But it isn't enough to just understand political science and sociology and economics, all of those assumed things that leaders should know, but also ecology, architecture, psychology, and so on. And so you bring in the occasional treats of Hope Jardin and Malcolm Gladwell and Alain de Botton, each book unique, adding another layer to this leader's understanding of the world. The second kind of reading is in fact the bread and butter for a leader. This is the nonfiction that takes the temperature of the people. News, now social media, petitions, journals, keep the leader informed of the shape of populace. Here, the leader also gets a chance to keep abreast of other leaders, other people that are leaders in their own right. So books that we have all read, Shoe Dog, Wild Swans, Mein Kampf. Finally, the leader looks at a third, not quite a reading, but a writing and ruminating on the continuous future that presents itself. This task is not the leaders alone, but the advisors, perhaps, if there are any, that present the leaders with reports, suggestions, bills, depending on what kind of leader we're talking about, for scrutiny. So it certainly benefits the leader to be armed with the truth of the world, to be curious about the unknown, and finally to be mindful of the group's condition. I think this debate reduces a vast spectrum of literature into two very extreme labels. It was very difficult, I think, to consider just the two. So I'd imagine that our fictional leader is as strapped for time as we are, never quite able to read all that we hope to read or even ought to read. And so, okay, perhaps the leader would only read when, you know, when they have the luxury to read fiction. Okay, that's me.
Okay, questions from fellow speakers? Okay, audience questions. Achha, Ravi, you said, yes, Ravi, yeah.
No, I just wanted clarification. You mentioned Shoe Dog, which in my vocabulary, it's a fiction, because fiction and non-fiction, these terms don't exist in any other language except English. So I separate them as storytelling and as essays, or so Shoe Dog, Shantaram, Joseph Anton, for me, they all sit in the same category. So are you putting Shoe Dog as non-fiction, or?
Yeah, so I'm kind of talking about autobiographies or biographies here, books about other leaders and their journeys that are assumed leader in this essay would read about. But I think that, and in fact, I had another version of this debate that I'd sent to Sonia that did talk about the blurred lines, but then I decided to steer clear of it because I don't think it serves either side of the argument to bicker on, you know, what is fiction and non-fiction and where those lines are, because they're unclear, and I think we can all agree on that.
It is critical because one side is about people and their stories, and the other side is about thoughts and words, and you know, so.
So are you?
No, Likla, no, you can. It's just a single. Then you can't. That's a good response, and we'll stay with that. Any audience? Anybody? Yeah, Priya. Yeah. Okay. Since nobody else, yes.
Yeah. So Likla, I think it's almost related to Ravi's question. I mean, you talked about a lot of biographies, but in my book, I think biographies are actually fiction because most people are notoriously or should I say unreliable narrators, whether it's about their own life or, you know, if you've got somebody to write your autobiography, even then you're going to be an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
That comes down to storytelling. And it's not so much a question of whether it's fiction or whether it isn't. it is a story, and how much of the story is presented as fact and as fiction can, of course, be debated on. And perhaps, Sonia, this could be your second debate topic. But it is an autobiography, and in itself is telling this somebody's truthful story. And I have assumed a very, very idealistic leader in this case. So
That's
autobiography, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Likla. That is true, and lots of very pertinent points. And one of the things that we do discuss about a lot of autobiographies, Priya and Ravi, you both came up with saying that, you know, people tell their own stories and they may not stick to the truth. Autobiographies recently have come under fire a lot for that, and they are subject to rigorous fact checking now. I mean, you have a James Frey who's discredited. So there is a standard, whether it's blurred or not, that's true, but they are held up to a certain standard, which they may or may not. We'll have to carry on from here. Okay. Before that, the other thing which I need to mention is that every speaker has to be rated by everybody except the speakers. So if you can just send a private chat to K, what is your Bhavani? So that's her name. So rate Ravi on a scale of 1 to 10. So just send Ravi 10, Ravi 9, Ravi whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, and Likla 10, 9, 8, whatever. So just send that in a private chat to K, who will collate it at the end of the debate. So I'm giving you like 20 seconds to do that. And next we have Vivina, and who will speak for the motion, which is that this house believes leaders benefit more from reading fiction rather than non-fiction. Vivina, as it happens, is a non-fiction writer herself. She's a financial writing whiz, wrote for the Hindustan Times and for Mint, and she has managed to weasel out the financial secrets of not just CEOs, but the film stars as well. So she has all Hrithik Roshan and companies, investment plans, etc., all not just in print, but in her head. She also writes speeches for Kumar Mangalam Birla. She's writing a webinar right now and has a podcast, a pop-up, a cooking pop-up, because she cooks as well. And if that isn't enough, in her spare time, she is studying ancient history. So over to Vivina. You have to unmute yourself, Vivina.
Yeah, hi. I would start by saying that now I am a convert from a non-fiction to fiction. So these are some of my observations that I had. Otherwise, I would only stick to non-fiction. But now, since I've entered this space, I have realized some of the major things that you can pick from fiction. Starting from communication, we speak about communication, leadership quality. One of the most key qualities is communication. What I understand when I'm reading fiction is that the vocabulary is so rich as against a non-fiction writing. Even when you are, when you read it and then when you go back to your, whether it's your speech writing or your email writing as a leader, the chances of getting the right words and the right tonality is much more higher if you are reading a fiction, if you've read a fiction. Another thing that I have noticed is that managerial competency, because you as an individual will not be able to be in the shoes of others who are your team members. The chances to understand them better, whether it's for example, recently we read conventional store woman. What happened there is you would have never noticed that if you had not read how the woman thinks in her head. So the kind of empathy that you kind of pick from the fictional stories is much higher as against a non-fiction book. Another thing that comes to mind is in terms of the power of simulation, for a point of, in the sense that in a fiction you don't know what is going to happen, as in you in a non-fiction, you know what is happening, what is going to happen, as in you already know what's happened in a sense, and you're going deep diving into understanding what it is. But and also the subject becomes much more narrower, because most chances are, if I'm a finance writer, I will read more of finance books, or if I'm a design architect, I may tend to tilt towards design non-fiction. But in fiction, you kind of get, it kind of broadens your thought. You kind of look at different aspects of people's life, whether it's fantasy or whether it's comic. The approach is to look at different subjects, which kind of enhances your ability to think differently. Also, it's telling you stories of what can happen as against what has already happened, because you can so that's one thing. Another thing is act. So as a leader, you have to act decisively. In that sense, what fiction does is you're not trying to find answers to your decisions, but it's a slow process. Through the book, you kind of get perspective. So you actually don't get an answer when you're reading fiction, but you kind of get a perspective of what you need to understand from so it makes your mind more it's open minded. It makes you more open minded. Also, you also have like the requirement to release your stress as a leader. So stories have a very powerful is a very powerful tool as a stress reliever. I have noticed personally, when I read like a finance writing, I am very tied to my work. Suppose I'm writing about debt market and I'm reading about something that's happened in a corporation from a non-fiction book. It's still your mind is still in that zone where you are in a work mode, or you like it. That's why you're reading it. But when you read a non-fiction, it kind of also opens up to another possibility in terms of it distracts you from what you're reading, what you would otherwise read, but kind of brings you back to giving you another perspective in that sense. And also helps you kind of disengage from your current work or the subjects that you really like, to come back to it refreshed, is what I have personally felt in the last couple of months when I've been reading fiction. I think my time might be up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of data and lots of points from the journalists there, guys. Yes, Abhishek.
Vivina, you said that fiction helps you get an insight into the minds of other people, or the way they think. But in what way does fiction do this differently than, say, memoirs or biographies, or essays, profiles, all the other non-fictional ways in which you can also get profiles of people?
Right. So for example, I'll give you one example of say Becoming, Michelle Obama's book, which we can pick as an example. You know what she's going through and what she's done over the years through her story, but you kind of not get the emotional connect, or you don't get the kind of strong emotional connect that you would get in a fiction writing, probably, which I have not seen in that, which I couldn't find in that book. Or for example, if you're reading about people on technology, any of the subjects, the focus tend to be more towards what's happened in their particular period of life. So it's not more, there's no, the empathy part or that kind of just is not prominent. So you kind of, as a leader, if you are trying to understand your team in that sense, you would need to understand why the person is functioning in a particular way, which I feel that's possible by reading a fiction in that sense, as against a memoir, because it's not giving you a complete picture in that sense. In a way, like what Likhla, was discussed earlier, that the memoir is also, in a way, might be non-fiction, because it kind of can be distorted.
Mena, you're keeping the 30-second on the question, right? Yeah.
I know, but Sonia, I feel so bad to interrupt.
No, you have to be ruthless as a timekeeper.
Okay.
I can see another hand going up from Shubho. If you have a question, Shubhodeep, yes.
Hi, Vivina. I heard you say that in non-fiction, you know what has happened. In which case, why read non-fiction? If any book you know what has happened, then why read that book?
Oh, I'll tell you. So the book that we were reading, which we had recommended, which you had recommended, which was the user-friendly one. For example, I'll pick that one example. The like button, for example, we all use it of Facebook. The way it was described of understanding the creativity as in what went behind it, I feel that it's important to know it, why it happened, and how the thought process went through. Like there were multiple, they had decided to give it a different name, and then it went on changed, and then how Zuckerberg picked it, and then what happened. So you want to know the process, but that itself I feel is not enough for a complete overall growth of a individual to come up as a leader. Just by knowing the facts, he will also need to know the emotional or the mental journey that the person is going through.
Vivina, I'm so sorry, your time is up.
Yeah, thanks. Mena, that's great.
Okay.
Perfect.
I shall do that.
Good response. But 2 questions, that's it per speaker. Okay. So she's got grilled enough. Oh. so the next person on is Abhishek, very polite and looks very polite and very polished, and he is, but we do not get into an argument with this individual because chances are that you would lose. And if we look at a historical trend that has happened, he went up a few years against the London School of Economics, and Abhishek Fadnis won. And London School came back and said, you're right and I'm wrong. And he had people like Richard Dawkins tweeting in his favor. So he's Abhishek, just be warned, be careful, and there you are. The screen's all yours.
Done your research. Okay, so my time start?
Yes, start.
So anyway, any resemblance to a leader, living or dead, is coincidental. I think it's been said in jest that a good generalist knows less and less about more and more. And I actually think that's a good place for leaders to start. Look at the leaders around me. I think there are 3 things that are in really short supply right now. One is an appreciation of the complexity of the world. The second is the humility to recognize the limits of your own knowledge and surround yourself with smart people. And the third is an appreciation of how messy things are. Be realistic of what you can achieve and how. And on all 3 counts, I think leaders reading non-fiction would solve a lot of problems in the world. So first, the question of complexity. Any economy, society, bureaucracies, these are complex beasts. I mean, think of the questions we have facing us in the future: universal income, artificial intelligence, microbial resistance. To join the dots, you need a mastery of a lot of different fields. That's what we learned from Range. And you can only understand if you read about them. And the magic of nonfiction is that variety. There's so many different disciplines of anthropology, sociology, psychology, law, economics, just the sheer richness of the world that comes out through that. And there's so much to discover that it feels like a waste of time to read anything else after that. But once you begin to read more, you realize how little you know. And that's important for a leader to recognize. And you've got to surround yourself with experts who do. So at one stroke, that gets rid of all the sycophants and the idiots and yes men who surround any leader. And from that comes the third point, that most leaders face a challenge to engage with the world as it is, not as you want it to be. So things are messy, boring often. There are no shortcuts. Sorry,
Abhishek.
Yeah, sorry, I was saying there are no shortcuts generally, and that's what non-fiction teaches you, that it's not a narrative that needs to be sped along or tied up in some way. There's no Deus ex machina. All there is just the long, hard grind of compromise, incremental progress, frequent boredom, disappointment. Gryffindor doesn't always win the house cup with last minute points. So in that sense, non-fiction cuts you to size, and nothing to me illustrates this better than my own first love, which is history. Thousands of years of accumulated human wisdom, the experience of so many leaders before you, their hubris, mistakes, and triumphs. And that makes you feel really small. And for some leaders, that's probably a good place to start.
You have half a second more if you want to say something.
Okay, so questions from the speakers. Yeah, Ravi has a question. And then Sahai has a question from the audience. So starting with Ravi.
Abhishek, you talked about this complexity of the world. Last week, Elon Musk, who was the first to send a private spaceship, he was interviewed by, I think, the New Yorker, and he said the two things, and he's a PhD in physics, things that inspired me to do the whole thing were two books, Lord of the Flies and Foundation by Asimov. And I'll give you another example of Manmohan Singh, who is has both Oxford and Cambridge. So I think he's quite literate. And in one of the interviews, he had mentioned that he hadn't read a single novel in his life. So you can rate him. I mean, I personally believe his poor leadership comes from that. So how will you judge those two characters, Musk and Manmohan Singh, based on your argument?
Oh, well, they're both incredibly complex characters. Inspiration comes from many places. I mean, it comes from life experience. It comes from the teachings of people around you. Sometimes it comes from books. I find there is quite a gulf between Manmohan Singh and Elon Musk as personalities. Musk has his own achievements and some inspirational record as a leader. He also has his controversies and his, and his own drawbacks, which Manmohan Singh does not bring. There's a lot of baggage that he doesn't bring as a leader. So I just feel like, I wouldn't necessarily say one is a better leader than the other, but their inspiration, varies as for all of us. There's no one.
Time up.
Thanks for that. Sahai, your question.
Hi. So my question is, doesn't this leader that's sort of sitting around reading nonfiction and history all day long, wouldn't that make him rather a dull boy or girl?
Well, for one thing, I hope he's read a lot of it, or she's read a lot of it before they get to their leadership position. On the other hand, yes, I hope they will spend at least some part of their time reading. I remember Obama would speak a lot about the kind of books he was reading and the influence that they had on him, both fiction and non-fiction, admittedly. It doesn't need to be limiting in that sense. There's a whole, there's a lot of lyricism and richness and wisdom to be found in non-fiction as well. It doesn't need to be dry or prosaic all the time.
Okay, so Abhishek, thanks for that. Are you saying you're allowing a little bit of fiction to slip into the cracks?
It says readers are better off reading.
If you have to choose, it's a tough choice. Non-fiction.
Sometimes if there's non-fiction to be found, they can read a little bit of fiction. It's okay.
So it's allowed. So even the non-fiction guys are allowing the fiction people a little. Okay, so just take 20 seconds to rate both Vivina and Abhishek on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 for the highest and 1 for the least. So send those in to K. The ratings, just send them by chat to K. Okay, so next on, if, in school, we used to have all those trophies and prizes and awards for like the best all-rounder, right? So if there were to be a best all-rounder prize for like Delhi or India or the world, Priyadarshini would get it. She does an amazing amount of things. She is, she does market research. She's a painter. She sings. She has also written 2 books, one for children and one for adults. And if you're ever on a fastest finger first quiz with her, just look out because she's like an ace quizzer as well. So Priya, screen's all yours.
Thanks, Sonia, for that very flattering intro. So to start with, I think I've got about 25 years of experience in the corporate world. And while I'm an omnivore, having seen leaders around me, I have a strong belief that they're reading a lot more of fiction. And I'm going to borrow from non-fiction to tell you why. So there's research that actually says that, fiction, good fiction is a powerful simulation of different realities. And that there's an overlap in the brain networks that understand stories and the ones that build connections with people and build relationships, right? There was even a research where they looked at people's brains while reading fiction, and they found that the brain actually reenacted everything that was being narrated, the sights, the sounds, the smells, right? So you can imagine how much it would help you put yourself in the shoes of somebody whom you're unlikely to come across or maybe haven't come across in real life. So you can only imagine the impact on leaders if, for instance, Trump had learned to read beyond Twitter and had actually read The Color Purple. How different would he have been, right? Another aspect is that this concept called cognitive closure. So cognitive closure is the desire to quickly reach a conclusion in decision making and an aversion to ambiguity. And we see this in the corporate world a lot of the times. All right, we don't have time for all the facts. Let's quickly come to a decision. We need to do something. We need to be seen doing something. Research also proves that fiction readers have actually a less of a need for cognitive closure. That means they're more open to ambiguity and they're much more open to actually hearing different narratives, competing narratives and paying attention. So much stronger EQ develops. And at the same time, this helps them be more creative and imaginative because you're not rushing to a conclusion. So imagine if you did not have strong, decisive leaders taking knee-jerk decisions. How different would the lives of migrants have been today? Right? And I think a lot of other points have been made, so I'm going to just make it very quick rather than repetitive. Another aspect is that reading fiction apparently does improve vocabulary because the range of words that are used in fiction is far higher than the range of words used in non-fiction. So you can just imagine a leader who had words beyond cow thief, hugely, and I know all the best words. Thank you.
That was good. Yeah, actually, this is nice to be able to clap. That's the worst part of Zoom that we can't, but everyone's mics are off. So questions from fellow speakers. Questions for Priya. Okay. And from the audience, any questions? Okay, Priya, you appear to have convinced everybody, and there are nobody's doubting any of your claims.
I have the best words.
So moving on to Roland, and Roland is divides his time between Roland. You're on. Is it? I can't see you.
Is he there? I don't see him.
Seen him, Sonia.
Huh?
He's not there.
I'm here. I'm here. Just the video internet's not great, so I'm keeping on audio.
Okay,
my deep, sexy voice will be enough to persuade you.
Ooh. Okay. So and the fact that we shall imagine you and what your geography is. So Roland normally divides his time mostly Mumbai, sometimes Toronto. At the moment, he has organized things amazingly. He is in Kenya in the vicinity of a beach, and he works in HR, but he does lots of other things. The last scene, he was writing about sicarios for the caravan and also researching a piece in Kenya that gets him to speak to the young Kenyan people, boys and girls, and interestingly wealthy white Europeans. So the young Kenyan men and very wealthy white Europeans, and that's his story. So, we'll wait for that. He's also a TEDx speaker, by the way. So yes, Roland, it's all yours now.
Okay, so Albert has trouble sleeping at night, despite the fact that his mom would kiss him on the forehead, murmur sleep tight, and switch off the light. He often would lie on his back, eyes wide open, and staring at the ceiling. One day his mom asked him what kept him at night. I'm thinking, he answered. About what, she queried. I'm wondering where the light goes. What light, his mother asked. When you switch off the lamp each night, where does the light go? Albert is none other than Albert Einstein, and this showed his early path to discovering the groundbreaking theory of relativity. As Einstein once said, I have no special talents, I'm only passionately curious. It is the same curiosity that drove Richard Feynman into winning the Nobel Prize. He said, I do physics not for the glory of the awards and prizes, but for the fun of it, for the sheer pleasure of finding out how the world works, what makes it tick. So why should leaders read nonfiction over fiction? The first is for health. Fiction readers might espouse the benefits such as empathy, but nonfiction actually is a great workout for the brain. It improves memory, analytical skills, and prevents degenerative neurological disorders. Secondly, life lessons. Harry Potter may be fun to read, but Abraham Lincoln could inspire you through resilience despite incredible poverty. And Nelson Mandela can teach you a thing or two about navigating complex politics. This could inspire you and develop your thought process, allowing you to reevaluate and reassess your own life situations. As one philosopher once said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Third, critical thinking and career development. Beyond just storing knowledge, we learn to make human connections. I think many of us can understand this considering the popularity of Netflix shows like Mindhunter and Making of a Murderer. I became fascinated with them, serial killers, in grade 11 psychology class, leading me to work in research and motivation nearly a decade later. And till this day, I appreciate the depths of the human psyche as I work in human resources. To conclude why leaders should read nonfiction over fiction, I will quote an exchange between two best friends, Mike and the writer Miles, in the movie Sideways, an Oscar-nominated film that I just happened to stumble across a few days ago. Mike said, "What is the subject of your book? Nonfiction?" Miles responds, "No, it's a novel. Fiction? Yes, although there is quite a bit from my own life. So I suppose that technically some of it is nonfiction." Mike, "Good, I like nonfiction. There's so much to know about this world. I think if you read something somebody just invented, waste of time."
Okay, good timing. And questions from fellow speakers. Questions from anybody else? Delna, yes.
Yeah, hi. So I just want to ask you, Roland, that I think your arguments that you just presented to us, how would you respond if I said, I think that to me, that means nonfiction is more suitable for managers and fiction more suitable for leaders?
So just to repeat it, you'd say nonfiction is more suitable for managers and fiction is more suitable for leaders. Is that what you're stating?
Yes, I'm saying in the context of this debate and in the context of the arguments that you presented, my response would be that. And what do you feel about that?
So I would disagree with that for a few reasons why. I think if you're thinking, what is the leader? It's, there's could be many different definitions, but I would define it as someone who's innovative and leading in their field, regardless of what it is. So if I wanted to learn more about AI, if I wanted to be innovative, I need to know about what is being established in artificial intelligence right now. If I want to build, spaceship or SpaceX, I need to know what's happening in rocket science right now. So I see nonfiction as the foundation, which is crucial to providing a sense of innovation and creativity. I think what I see fiction as is kind of although probably not as bad, but it's your equivalent of Bollywood. It's kind of an escapist aspect.
Okay, thanks, Roland. You have the timer on that, you have men on that. Somebody else raised their hand, but I can't see on the screen. So just, just speak. I see somebody's hand. Yeah, Sahai, yes.
Hi, Roland. You mentioned some exceptional characters there like Albert and Nelson, and I wouldn't argue against those, but I would argue that the average nonfiction book, management books and such like, are full of absolutely turgid prose that ought never to have been written without any insight whatsoever. And the ratio of good nonfiction to bad nonfiction is actually extremely low. How would you respond to that criticism of just wasting time reading lots of turgid stuff?
So I would say the same could be said about fiction. That same argument can hold against fiction. Look at the incredible, look at the amount of sales for 50 Shades of Grey, right? They don't even have an editor on that book. So I think the argument, the knife cuts both ways. That's the first thing. And I think the second is I look at it as the context of this debate, which is the debate is not what is the overall quality of the nonfiction genre. I look at it as that nonfiction should be read more than fiction. So it's still up to the reader to be discerning.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, Priya, he's finished it too. So that's, okay. So we'll just take a 20-second stop for you to send your ratings for Priya and Roland as speakers, 2K on private chat, 10 being the highest and 0 being the least. So send your ratings, 2K. Priya and Roland, what are your ratings? Next speaker up is Mumal, also known as Mimi. Looks stately and sympathetic, and she is. However, I have to warn you, there's a lot of steel there, and people who have a whole generation of city bankers who have been trained by Mimi will testify to that. So, watch where you're going with her. And you don't want to get on her wrong side, especially if you want a job in the social sector, because she is, I know that HR guys is the wrong term, but like she is the, the headhunter of them all. And she has a contact list that people would kill for. So Mimi, all yours.
So thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So thank you so much. The thing about going the very last for your case is that a lot of the arguments have been made, but hopefully there's a different context in which to read them. So first of all, my point is that we are all leaders, whether it's Sonia with the JDC or Sonal in her with his with her family or Shubha with his company. Leading is influencing. So what helps create influence? It's not only about how much knowledge we have about a subject or a domain, which some of which we may have got from reading nonfiction as well. But to my mind, it's a whole lot about how we are able to use that to communicate with and shape those around us. And influence is built through two things, empathy and creativity. And as someone has said before, there is conclusive neuroscience research that now shows that reading literary fiction directly contributes to both. Fiction is the flight simulator of the heart and the mind, helping us see things that we could not ever have imagined in the absence of the book. When we read fiction, we truly deeply understand another perspective, fall into another way of thinking. Consider Dhritarashtra's dilemmas in the Mahabharata, or the characters in Sophie's Choice, or on another note, the feelings of the Empress of Blandings. Reading Hunger Games, Crazy Rich Asians, or Exploding Mangoes, or even The Sympathizer expands our thinking as we navigate the ambiguities of plot, narrative, and character, suspending judgment, but staying with the story to the very end to see what unfolds, building the space for creativity. A nonfiction work on contemporary history or a biography might do this with somewhat more certainty, leaving smaller room to accommodate other realities. How many of us began to notice grocery store staff after reading Convenience Store Woman? And would a book on human psychology or building great teams have had the same impact? So while all of us, the leaders in this group, are sapiens made of germs and steel, may agree that the world is flat, have range, blink, and are generally user-friendly, the stories that fiction tells us are what someone described as a map of other people's intentions. Understanding this as leaders helps us influence our families, our neighbors, our colleagues, our communities, and our companies better. It helps us to lead better.
Yay.
questions. Yes, Likla.
So when we talk about things like creativity, understanding, empathy, humanity, why is it this assumption that nonfiction doesn't offer this too? These are subjects in their own right that have been explored by nonfiction writers as well. I'm going to leave that up to you to talk about.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. And you know, this topic provoked endless debate in our family, and I heard a lot of that argument. And I don't think that that reading fiction is the only way to develop it. But there's a little bit of a difference between experiential, understanding what Harry felt when he lived with the Dursleys, relative to reading about an orphan child who goes through a certain process because he's in a certain circumstance. So I think a little bit of the difference is that on the empathy side. On the creativity side, I think somebody has mentioned this concept of cognitive closure, and that's the subject in which neuroscience is actually quite interested, to understand if there is no certain reality, if there's no certain outcome, if there's not a thread that's leading you from point A, B, C, all the way through Z, then how do you negotiate that space of uncertainty? That's the space for creativity.
Okay, thanks, Mimi. One last question to Mimi from anybody. Okay. Okay, so that's, thanks very much. And we come to the last speaker for today, which is Shubhadeep. Shubhadeep, in his youth, he tended to become a godman, perhaps because he told fortunes and he looked at palms and he gave passions. But then he got married and he became a CEO instead. Like many people on the group, he thinks the solution to everything lies in a book. And that could sometimes lead to a lot of frustration among the people around him. And you know, his eldest daughter was once heard observing very exasperatedly that, my God, if I break my leg and go to Baba, instead of taking me to a hospital, he'll hand me a book and say, look, this is all about fractures. So Shubhadeep, the screen's all yours.
Before I start, I must respond to my introduction. Ambrose Bierce, unfortunately non-fiction, has a lovely book called The Devil's Dictionary. And he has a definition of a saint, which came very close to what Sonia introduced me as. The definition of a saint is a dead sinner, revised and edited. So
Dead sinner, revised and edited.
that's what marriage does to you. Anyway, now you can start my time, Mena.
Okay.
Friends, readers of the book club, countrymen, my lady wife. I come here to praise non-fiction, not to bury fiction. I dare not argue with the lovely ladies who praise fiction. Any argument and I would be fiction myself. So I accept that fiction is a great read. The pulp and plunder, the mayhem and murder, the rape and romance, they all are honorable reads. But I speak for my friend not fiction who gets buried very easily. As of the last poll, 70% said they'll read fiction. If you look at reading lists of real leaders, Obama, Bill Gates, Buffett, Angela Merkel, you'll find at least it's the other way around. It's 70% non-fiction. And in olden times, Alexander, Ashoka, even the non-reader Akbar. If you take the argument that leaders benefit more for fiction, why haven't these leaders been displaced by James Hadley Chase reading leaders? Maybe in Donald Trump, you may get a counterexample. I don't think he reads anything except his own tweets. You can call them fiction. The world will probably agree. I don't for a moment argue that fiction doesn't have the benefits of teaching empathy. But empathy is necessary, but not sufficient for a leader. As Sam Bannakshaw says, the first thing a leader must know is his stuff. And as soon as you define the world larger than your immediate family, you have to grow out of fiction and deal with concepts of society, history, eco, maths, management, which are larger than you or your group. And fiction, which majors in the individual, cannot deal with large numbers. Each person is different. By the fact that you go into each person's mind so minutely means you can't explode it over 10,000 people. So communism, which was either good or bad, I'm not getting into it, was not started by reading Tolstoy. It was started by reading Marx. David Hume and Adam Smith did not write romantic novels to start capitalism. Large numbers which leaders deal with need unifying, simplifying thoughts, and that takes you into subjects that are by definition non-fiction. I know there has been some definition thing that autobiographies are fiction. No, autobiographies are not fiction. Go into any bookshop, you'll figure out. Memoirs are not fiction. Poetry is non-fiction. Essays are non-fiction. Newspapers are non-fiction. Blogs are non-fiction. Because as soon as you define something as not something, so all you read, all of us read much more of non-fiction. The newspaper is non-fiction than fiction by this measure. The argument that anybody can be a leader without reading too much of non-fiction is therefore crazy. Finally, the romantic argument. The wide range of non-fiction that you will deny yourself. You will not struggle with Andre Agassi, who hated his father and used it to win in tennis. That's memoir. Despite all the mills and boons, you will not be able to declare, our love, could you and I with fate conspire to grasp the scheme of things entire. That's poetry. You won't be able to compare your decline of the Roman Empire to the decay around you. That's given. So you won't even know how Nike got its swoosh or Theranos' bad blood, because they're all non-fiction. I agree that it would be a nice, cozy life, curled up, tip to toe in a blanket with a roaring fireplace, hot coffee in the mug, with Red Butler looking moody yet scarlet. If I may dare to suggest, it's an image of a contented householder, not of a leader. They are oxymorons. I agree everyone doesn't need to become a leader.
Shubho, your time is up.
You must realize that are two antonyms to fiction. One is non-fiction, the other is reality or real. So fling away fiction if you want to be a real leader.
Okay, somebody has music playing and I can't figure who. So
my daughter.
Oh dear, it was yours.
She wanted a background.
She chose exactly the time when I had to.
It was a nice touch.
Okay, questions. Yes, Ravi.
Shubho, you talked about at least 4 people, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Obama, and perhaps Lenin. All of them, I assure you, in their formative years, read a lot of fiction. And as far as my experience goes, most of the people in their formative years, the heavy readers, they read lots. I mean, Buffett reads 500 pages a day. In the formative years, they read lots of fiction. And as you get older, you start converting into more non-fiction because you're no longer that impression. Lenin read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy much before he read Marx. So I don't buy this. In their formative years, all of these leaders have been readers. You read Obama's list before he became president, and you will find that 70–80% of those books are.
Okay, so Shubho, how do you respond to that?
Now, I completely agree with you. The topic is not that young boys should not read fiction. The topic is leaders benefit more from reading fiction. Now, by the time you become a leader, by the time you become a leader, you benefit, and you've just proved my point. So as soon as they've become leaders, though they were fiction readers when they were young, as soon as they've become leaders, they are reading more and more non-fiction because they are benefiting more from it. So if you say that if you read fiction, you will become a leader, I have no arguments with it. But the topic is not that. The topic is that leaders benefit more from reading non-fiction.
Okay, another question. Last question of the debate. Likla, yes. No, not Likla. So has anybody put that? You know, Raghu, you had a hand up, but you're not even on my screen. So
Monica also had a hand up.
Monica, Raghu.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question, and to Shubho's introduction, Shubho, give us a book, a non-fiction book, which has the same range and depth of emotions as the Mahabharata.
Ooh. Mahabharata is fiction.
I'll give it to you. That book is called Mahabharata.
Yes.
You see, this argument that Mahabharata is fiction, I'm sorry. In fact, the reason you like Mahabharata is because you believe there is a real Arjun, you believe there is a real Krishna, you believe that the war happened. You believe they are teaching you something right. So the example which beats Mahabharata is Mahabharata. It's a book of non-fiction. It's not fiction. It's true. It happened. It happens in human life. It's happening today.
Okay. So yeah.
Debatable. I think that's another debate, whether the Mahabharata is fiction or non-fiction.
Well, if you see myths, see, the Mahabharata is an epic. It's not, it's put in a sense of epic. And epic is something that straddles both history as well as fiction. So true, to that extent, yes.
Okay, so that's it for questions for Shubho. And so take 20 seconds to send ratings for Mimi and Shubho to Bhavani on private chat. And so we'll give Bhavani like 5 minutes to collate everything, to add up. And in the meantime, you're adding 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes. And in the meantime, I'm going to call different people to give their opinions on the motion. And I'm going to start with somebody who has trained thousands of debaters, including some in this panel. And that's Sonali Gandhi. And Sonali, so lovely that you could join us, and would love your thoughts on the motion and on whether you agreed or disagreed with what different speakers said and what you liked and what they could do differently.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sonia, first of all, for inviting me to join you here. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm usually either debating myself or training debaters. So it felt really lovely to just sit back and enjoy and smile away at all the various perspectives offered here. And I got to learn so much in the bargain. So I don't want to repeat any of the points that everybody has already made, but the one thing I'd like to just comment, if I may, is that how beautifully each of you have stuck to your stand, whether you genuinely believed that fiction is what a leader should be reading or not. I mean, I'm sure, like Sonia said at the beginning, some of you had to offer points of view that you don't necessarily really believe in yourself, but that didn't come across at all. The kind of examples that many of you have shared were quick notes on my notepad for things to be added to my to be read lists. The Jew Book Club is obviously doing some phenomenal work, and I realize that in my little pond where I deal with a small number of people with trying to get them to do much more out there that we seem to be unaware of. So thank you for opening my eyes to that. And congratulations to everyone who has spoken so beautifully and is so articulate.
Wanted to bring in Azira. Are you here? Yeah, Azira. I wanted to bring in Azira and your perspective on fiction, non-fiction. And again, in terms of, we've looked at it in terms of a leader, and, maybe you could give it a slant as, a leader in the finance world or in banking or whatever. I leave that to you.
Okay, so I think I agree with Shubho where he said that as a kid, you probably had to read fiction so that you had the mindset to open your mind. But then as you are a leader, you should be actually spending time reading from diverse fields. And I agree with Abhishek on this, because never before have we been in times which is so uncertain and where we are forced to borrow lessons from, whether it be epidemiology or economics or behavioral sciences. Like, for instance, how the market has behaved is completely beyond what everybody thought. We were all thinking we're going into a recession, and now we're reaching 52-day highs. And I'm sure that everybody in Goldman Sachs or any of the bankers who were saying that we're going into a recession is suddenly like, okay, we have to change our projections for the year. And to have that openness, I think it's important that you are able to draw from the various fields, and hence it's all the more important that leaders read a lot more of nonfiction.
So thanks, Azira. I'm going to take a small, 1 second. I'm going to take a small break to run a poll. And the poll is the duplicate of the poll that we had when we began. So, which goes as follows. If you had 10 books to read, how many of those would be fiction? So just give your number and...
Still 7. Huh? That's okay.
How many would be fiction? How many of the 10 would be fiction? Okay, so I have 21 of 26 have responded, 22. Okay, so everyone done?
Meena and I are getting only 1, so.
Okay, so so that's it. I'm ending the poll now, and okay, so and here are the results, and looks like the House has changed its opinion.
No, not yet.
We now are going to read less fiction than we did at the start of the debate. We were reading 6 books and now we're reading 5.
Oh God.
Yay! Go nonfiction. Yay!
Okay, I have another poll, which is that you have to select one person as the best speaker. Okay, so which I am putting on right now.
Sonia, we don't vote, right?
The participants can't vote. Sorry. Yes.
You can't vote?
No. Sorry.
Meena should be able to vote.
Yeah, Meena, you should vote.
Meena, you're not a participant. Highly, you can vote.
Promptly, I did.
I would like Meena to vote.
But you know now who she's voting for, Ravi. So why do you want her to vote? You know exactly who she's voting for.
I turned my head.
You liar. You promised to clean the room for her and then you said, shall I?
Ravi, that is pure fiction.
Okay, so I'm going to declare the results of this a little later. Okay. In the meantime, oh, I think I'll have to declare. I wanted to share my screen, so this will show up on the screen. I wanted to show you a little clip, guys, because we'll do the results at the same
Sonia,
time.
you can share your screen. It will not show. Just go to the go. Yeah. Go to screen share. It will show only that screen. Those things will come out in the window. You'll be able to share that.
Okay, fine. Okay. I'm just going to now, I want to show you guys a clip. Okay, and I love that clip and I think you will like it too. Okay. Screen.
I thought you'd never ask. I should say, I think as Christopher Hitchens once said, this is the first time in about 6 months that I'm in a room full of people who actually agree with me. Why don't we do this more often? I was saying on the first morning of the Freshers' Fair, a rather grey LSE bureaucrat came up to me, but very solemnly says, "Why are you making fun of the Prophet Muhammad?" And I said, "Well, sir, Someone has to. And the effrontery of this reply didn't go down very well at headquarters, but I think that was I meant what I said. The freedom to laugh at religion is, in my view, the fundamental freedom. It's fundamental free inquiry on the subject of religion, because it floods the supposedly arcane and mysterious inner workings of religion with sunlight, and it perforce it compels us to take the issue of religion less seriously, and thereby to contemplate its separation from the affairs of the state. And that, I think, is the beginning of secularism, and therefore it's very important. The objective of this little digression was to remind you to not let this particularly important freedom slide into disuse and neglect, and in fact to be bawdy, strident and impertinent while you're at it, because it is important. You have nothing to be ashamed of when exercising this freedom. The Jesus No Affair reminds us that those who would wish to deny us this freedom do not sleep, and therefore neither should we. It's also so that make full use of this freedom while you can. Do it for our comrades in the 55 countries, I think it is, where it's still a crime. Do it to defy every moon-faced community leader or Jurassic cleric who has sought to deny you this freedom in the name of respect and multicultural etiquette. If nothing else, do it just to make sure that you can, because don't underestimate the importance of that. And if with Islam this seems too dangerous, remember that most of us in this room, with some very notable exceptions, haven't done anything to earn this freedom. We just inherited it from those great men and women before us who've suffered terrible privation, paid very dearly for it. And we owe it to them. Therefore, it's not ours to give away, is what I mean. And therefore, we owe it to them to keep it safe and to bequeath it to our successors, intact, if not enhanced. And we also owe a duty of support to their contemporary heirs among us, those courageous ex-Muslims and secularist Muslims among us, people like Tahmina Kazi here, who are undertaking this thankless task for us from within the community. And they face far greater risks than any of us could ever dream of while they're doing this. So a little danger is a very reasonable price to pay for such illustrious company. And therefore we should. Here endeth the lesson. Just some acknowledgements beyond this. We're looking at some of my inbox for the last 6 months or so. I realized we've made all the right enemies, and that's immensely satisfying. But looking around this room today and meeting some of the wonderful people I've gotten to know over the last year, we've also made all the right friends. So we should just, in closing, I'll acknowledge a couple of them. Firstly, thank you to the artillery division of our campaign, Keith Borgeswood and Stephen Evans of the NSS. Thank you. For this very handsome gesture, firstly, it looks quite nice, the bottle does. Thank you. And for their advice, support, and reassurance at civilized and ungodly hours. We're also immensely grateful to the so far unnamed lawyer, the brilliant David Wolf QC, who represented us pro bono in this case. I tell everyone who cares to listen that the LSE relented not out of the goodness of its heart or because of our moral persuasion or even because of concern for its own reputation. Because if anything, the LSE seems to take a rather kamikaze attitude to its own reputation. But it was because David left them no choice through the caliber of our legal representations. And without him, we wouldn't have won this one. And finally, a toast to the Reverend Charlie Clengen of the Lawyers Secular Society, probably our most loyal and tireless ally. Charlie stood by us, he supported us in private and in the print and electronic media with a very refreshing and principled defense without exception or disclaimer of our rights. And I should say that when it would have been so much safer for him and so much more convenient to excuse himself and remember other appointments. So thank you very much. And lastly, a word of gratitude to my parents here who spent a fantastic sum of money to send me to university in England on the express or in the forlorn hope that I would devote myself entirely to academics and avoid any kind of distraction. You are all gathered here this afternoon to witness the culmination of my efforts to this end. And finally, if I haven't yet convinced you of the merits of free expression, you could do worse than heed the advice of one of my email correspondents over the last few months, a frightfully earnest evangelical who insists that Jesus gave us free speech. For my sake, if not for his sake, if not for mine, please make full use of it while you can.
Fabulous.
that was
Fabulous.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sonia, for sharing. We'd have never known. Great.
I was
Abhishek.
Abhishek, you look just the same. How long ago was this?
This was 2014. That was six years ago. That feels like a lifetime ago, but I don't know where Sonia found this because I don't remember telling her about this. So she has been.
No, you kept it very dark indeed. And how could you?
No, it was quite a fun time actually. We didn't eventually have to have our day.
But I think this, I like your statement about because they approach their own reputation, which I think a lot of people seem to have. I don't understand it, but.
Yeah. It's so great. And it's such a great turn of phrase. So guys, comment on the motion back to fiction versus non-fiction from that very exciting.
You have to mute Bull, I think.
Okay. So from that very exciting free speech and non-free speech, we back down to the earth to leaders and fiction and not fiction. Any comments, Monica? Anything on the subject?
Yeah, now I was just gonna as a lawyer, I thought Abhishek's was so well constructed, and now I can see why. He had the introduction, the body, the conclusion, as did Shubhadeep, of course. But I thought it was so well done, and I liked his futuristic kind of ideology, because I think bringing in UBI, bringing in AI, and I think that's where he won the fiction argument for me. Though I still would read, non-fiction argument, but I would still read fiction over non-fiction. But I thought, for UBI and AI, I do read non-fiction. But I do think that, as everyone has well aware, no one can 100% make a case, because there is a wider fiction, empathy, bigger picture argument, which you deep dive into nonfiction to agree on or to read up on the things that interest you. So I do find that fiction provides you with a wider canvas to understand different issues. And then when you become a leader, maybe to de-stress, you read fiction, but when you want to learn, you go into non-fiction. So, it is a very tough topic. So I was very impressed with everyone. And I was, I loved Shubhadeep's ending. I think that nicely rounded up everything, and trust him to be controversial. Mahabharata is non-fiction. I was like, the conviction with which he said that I will follow him to the ends of the earth for that. To be able to say that, kudos, extra points just for that. Well, superb arguments by everyone. And, of course, I remember Ravi so fondly he inspired me to think if someone can quit their whole life to go learn Russian to read his favorite author. I was wondering what I could do with my life. I remember he was the first person I met at the book club. What was it, like 20 years ago, Sonia?
Yeah,
18 years ago?
2004. So yes, 16 years.
16 years ago, yeah. So we just started, 6 of us in your room, and Ravi telling us that he moved to Russia to learn Russian, to read Dostoevsky at that point. And I was just like, this is my hero, So it's amazing to see everyone come back to stay to their guns, become even more of what they were. Shubho even then was fighting for non-fiction, guns, germs, and steel. And he's still fighting the same battle. Ravi was always fighting for fiction. He's staying with the same battle. So it's nice to see these arguments and, hear all of them. So yeah, I must say that I'm reading more and more, wider and wider, and some non-fiction because of all of you. So thank you.
Bhavani, one thing, okay, can you add all the non-fiction points for all the non-fiction speakers and all the fiction speakers and give those two totals? So like which camp, the fiction speakers, what were their total
that
and what was the
non-fiction? An additional problem. Right now, what I can tell you is who has got the best points, because I'm just dividing by whoever voted for that person, because to check if someone would be voting for 5 of the speakers, has left out 2 others, someone else has voted twice for someone. So it gets a little complicated. So what I've done is I've just averaged out across whoever's voted for that person. So at the top is...
Okay, so wait, one sec. Before that, what I'll do is I'll share the poll results, and then hopefully they will be the same, but these are the poll results, and then we'll try and later, the motion has been defeated. we ran a poll in the beginning, and people said they would read 6 out of 10. They would read 6 fiction books, and then after the debate, people said they would what 7. Oh, I beg your pardon. Am I wrong? Okay, 7. And after the debate, the average came down to 5 fiction books. So people in the group and in the audience are going to now, after listening to the speakers, they are going to be hot-footing it to non-fiction. And as for the poll on best speaker, here, just a second, I'm just going to share that result just now. 1 minute. There. So it looks like we have Shubhadeep at best speaker, followed by Vivina and Mimi, who tie for the 2nd place, followed by Roland and Abhishek, who tie for the 3rd place. Now, I'm not sure how this, whether this goes with your results or not, but let's have those as well, Kay.
This is rigged. This is rigged.
Yeah, I agree with that music. You had that music element which tipped the balance for sure. What kind of jugad Modi results are these?
Well.
So yeah, it sort of ties up with my results as well. So Shubho comes on top with 8.95 is his average score. But I have to say that, there were people who were there at the beginning who sort of seemed to have dropped off or forgot to score. So there were fewer scorers for Shubho, but he almost uniformly got, 8 and above, obviously 8 and above, because otherwise he shouldn't have got 8.95, but almost everyone, a few 10s and so on, followed actually very closely by Mimi, who gets 8.8. So she scored very well. I think the flow and how much people enjoyed the talk also reflects. Like later on, you sort of cut it and dice it, and you realize that someone was different and someone had a valid point. But when it came to just immediately scoring after she spoke, she got 8.8. Followed very closely by Abhishek, not closely by Abhishek, followed by Abhishek, followed by Priya, followed by Vivina and Roland, and then I think Ravi and Lekla managed to, they had the starter disadvantage because I think a lot of people scored low in the beginning, and then they sort of, this is my sense of how it was happening, because they probably said, let me start at 6 and then let me give higher and let me give lower. And then towards the end, they were like really loading it in. So yeah, that's how it was. That's how the scores are. And in terms of winners, like I felt there wasn't like every, some fiction speakers got high scores, some non-fiction speakers got high scores. So I can't really tell if, for every non-fiction high scorer like Shubho, you have a fiction high scorer like Mimi. So I can't really tell if it was going one way or the other. But obviously, subliminally, it was going on with the, how people have changed their minds and so on. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, congratulations, and the prizes are as follows. The speaker who comes first gets 10 volumes of their choice, fiction or non-fiction, and even if you've spoken for non-fiction and you ask for fiction, we won't tell, so it's okay, you can.
But can I put those books in the house?
I was going to say, Sonia, you have to clean them.
Followed by the speaker number 2 gets 5 books of their choice, and speaker number 3 gets 3 books of their choice. So those are the prizes which we will, so guys, get your, okay, so we actually have, I'm going to put the winners up, but I'm going to go with the polls. We have 2 sets of winners. So I'm going to include both sets of winners. So I will put the winners on, and I'll tell you how many books you need to put down as the books you want. and we will send them off to you. I just got my Amazon delivery. I had panic in my house because a kid of mine hadn't got her paper copy of Open, and so we ordered Open on paper by Amazon, and it just got delivered to Manali. So Amazon is delivering books again. That's the good news. Okay, any closing comments from anybody? Sahai, speak. You got to speak.
I gotta speak. Shubho described himself perfectly with that saint's definition from Ambrose Pierce. But look, I really enjoyed it. Thanks. I think wonderful speakers, and I think the quality of a debate is best shown by the fact I was left at the end really torn because I was forced to reflect, and I thought, in the end, for nonfiction, I'm really sort of absorbing somebody else's thoughts, and for fiction, I'm sort of creating my own, and that's the major thought that I was left with, which I'm sure I'll be continuing to debate with myself over glasses of wine. But thanks everyone from the eastern suburb of the Juhu Book Club, from Kay and myself in Singapore. Thank you.
And Bull, come on, say something.
Sorry, I was just saying that as a lawyer. So who's going to say?
Bull is Harihar.
Bull,
okay. Yeah.
Okay, Bull, we'll come back to you after Monica. Monica, yes.
Okay, fine. Now I was just going to say, as a lawyer, I read so much like nonfiction in all the cases. And I think it is all about the quality of writing. And I wish that they would include all that they learn from fiction into the writing of the cases. So I think all judges should have training in nonfiction writing before they go in to write their kind of cases. So that's what I was going to say. Like, because I read so much nonfiction on a daily basis, I think I quite enjoy fiction to get away from that. But I mean, that was my only comment. It was a fabulous, well-hosted, great debate. So congratulations to all the speakers. I think all of you kind of really put in so much work on this. I'm so impressed. So that's it. Thanks a lot, Sonia. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks. And this is actually what Vivina said as well, that, she reads so much in nonfiction in her work as well. So that's the other angle. So yeah, Bull, your comments.
It's all very good. Yeah. Very, very good. I say read porn.
Read what?
I said read porn. It's both fiction and non-fiction. On leadership. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think it was very good. Yeah? I mean, it's the longest call that I've ever attended on Zoom. I've never even used all these private messages and all. So it was quite a revelation for me. But I think it was very, very good. And yeah, I guess everyone reads books.
Are you convinced?
So it's good.
Are you convinced? Because, I know that you're a big fiction reader. So are you going to change your rating?
No. No, I'm not. I'm not convinced. I'm not. See, I mean, I think someone said that when you're young, you read a lot of fiction. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think that when we're young, we read a lot of non-fiction. Everything that we read in school is non-fiction. I mean, not many people read beyond what is this thing. And we are taught, non-fiction is what we have read. I don't know. I just like fiction because, and this is personally, I just find that it lends closure, right? I mean, that's the nice thing about fiction is that there is an end to it. And that's why I like it. I like the principle of closure. The thing with non-fiction is that, okay, you can endlessly keep turning the ways. And I'd really be interested in hearing from the person who was inspired by Dostoevsky. Fiction or non-fiction? Yes, I can't read that fiction. I find it the most intense non-fiction I've ever read in my life. He just like tears your soul apart. And so, I don't know. To me, I just find fiction, okay, I don't think of it in terms of leadership either. I really think leadership is far more than just reading books, but that's a separate debate. But I'm curious. I really actually am interested in the person who read Dostoevsky because it's very hard to say. Is he fiction? I don't know. I'm just curious. But yeah, I think it was really nice to hear everyone speak. That's it. Yeah.
So you have to come for one in-person round of Russian fiction, and then we will debate whether one can bear to read too much of Dostoevsky without getting gloomy, right?
No, I'm sure Sahai and Shubha read Dostoevsky, for example. So say whether it's fiction, non-fiction. I don't know. Like I said, every time I've tried, I've failed because I just found it too intense. But I'm just curious.
Okay, guys, any closing comments? Anybody?
Yeah, well, one of the things I feel fiction, the basic tenet of fiction is that it's made up. So it allows people to speak the truth, which nonfiction doesn't, because it purports to be the truth. So, and that is the root of, the Mahabharata debate, right? Mahabharata purports to be history. And therefore you don't know how it is being presented for who. So fiction allows you to sift through something which has been made up to look for the deeper truth in something. So in this world, as you go higher and higher in life, it becomes more, judgment becomes more and more key to that human being's survival, leave alone success. And to get that judgment, they have to be able to sift between fiction and non-fiction. And reading a fiction allows you to actually do that. This is my proposition.
Can't refute that. Actually, Kay, you should have asked questions.
I was busy counting and saying, oh, Likla has scored and Azira has not scored, so on and so forth, and sending them saying, have you scored for Abhishek? You haven't, and stuff like that. So,
because I'm telling you, you speakers were fabulous. You got off a little lightly. People didn't take your case. You didn't there were not too many people putting you on the spot and questioning you, right?
But we could automate this. Sonia, if you do this next time, we can use something called Woo Clap, or if anyone has Slido or whatever, and we can have the votes done online. So Bhavani doesn't have to collate them individually. So, you can do that through.
Yeah, that was very tedious. We actually tried lots of ways of polls and things. Shubho and I sat in the morning, but it seemed and then finally we said we'll just go for the manual, which is reliable, because if your application for votes doesn't work, then it's a little at the end of it, people have not been able to figure this out.
I'll talk to you later about it and what we've done. So, but yeah, it was superb. I mean, this is the only way to do it. Then I think Bhavani, amazing job. I think a special clap for you, Shubho and Bhavani, and keeping time. That is such an unappreciated job at the background that actually so much being done. Yeah.
Oh, I'm afraid I didn't do it very well because I felt so bad to interrupt. Everybody was speaking so well, and it's just downright rude. Okay, I mean, everyone had prepared as well, right? So just 2 minutes felt. Yeah,
but everybody was given a time, Meena, so you don't feel bad.
I know,
They were given a time.
I know, but I kept thinking that, oh, just one more sentence and that kind of thing. Also, Sonia, you should make this an annual feature. It's such fun.
I think it is great. Yeah, I think an annual will be good.
So, chalo, thanks guys from all over the place, and see you next week. Join in for discussion, those who would like to, on Isak Dinesen, better known as Karen. What's her name?
One question.
What's the other name she has?
Are you going to be selecting the books? What's the process?
So I'll send you that. It's the 2 stories we're doing from out of Africa. Karen Blixen's 2 stories.
And then after that?
I'll send that. I'll put that on.
Yeah, thank you to Roland and Abhishek for all the books you send us and all the links. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. So from my side, a big thank you.
Yes, I second that. Yes.
And thanks, Abhishek, for that. I loved that little clip. Huh? That's so amazing. I was so thrilled to find it. Okay. Thanks. And see you soon. See you next week, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Hi, Sound. Hi, Bhavani. Bye.
Bye.